2:30, so we're kicking it up. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being here. We're gonna talk about Drupal distributions today. And the next thing that we are gonna do is introduce ourselves. So, Mike.
Mike Marsello, mostly do front-end work, theming on the Drupal distribution.
Polo Reynaga. I have around 4 years of Drupal experience so far, and I moved 4 years to Austin, and I've been working in the University of Texas since then. And one of my passions is video games and anything that has to do with the gaming world. So I'm kind of a geeky person. It's not like that's new here, but anyways. And yeah, I think Austin is great.
Awesome.
What do you think, Tyler?
I think so, Polo, and it's a pleasure to work with you. And my name's Tyler Fahey. I'm with UT, and I've been a developer now for I think about 5 years, working in Drupal 7 and Drupal 8. And so we're here today to talk about distributions. And a Drupal distribution, just so we have a common understanding here, is essentially it's a full copy of Drupal. So it's an entire, much like when you download Drupal from Drupal.org, and you install a standard profile, you get a certain set of the article content type and those pre-configured things. Well, a distribution is essentially a customized version of that. So you can provide your own default standard install. And it can be, that includes modules, that includes libraries, any sort of configuration that you want to pre-package. And so that typically it's a quick start tool. And that's when you really want to think about using a distribution is when you have a use case for a common starting point that maybe you're an agency, you provide certain modules, certain features you don't want to bother configuring on every site. You just want to have it out of the box and customizable from there. But at least you're saving a lot of time potentially on configuration. Some famous distributions that already exist. So there's a few well-known ones. There's Commerce Kickstart, which gives you sort of all the e-shopping, e-commerce functionality sort of out of the box. Gets you started on that. There's Atrium, which is really for an intranet type of file sharing and things like that. There's I know there's one, the OpenY, that the YMCA uses, that they distribute for all of their clubs around the country, and so a lot of famous distributions. For us at the University of Texas, so we have around 100 sites that we maintain, and we're continuing to accumulate or to build sites. And so there's very sort of rigid brand guidelines the university likes for us to follow, and there's accessibility requirements we have to be very careful of. So this was our sort of compelling reason for why we can save a lot of time and leverage distribution for our clients at the university. So here's just a snapshot. This is we have a distribution right now in Drupal 7. This is just when you install, you have a sample content. So it has our logo, has our brand, all that stuff just right out of the box. You're going to get it. You can optionally not get the demo pages, but we do provide those for if people just want to take a look and sort of get an idea of the different widgets and functionality. We have a page building tool built in out of the box. So here's just a sample of that in action. You can see some different widgets that we offer. The clients can edit and move things around. So here we're moving, we removed a widget, we're moving this widget over to another region. And so all this functionality, no configuration needed. It's sort of pre-baked into our distribution. Now, as we have had this distribution for several years, there's been a few pain points that we have encountered. We have a very tight coupling sort of theme. We have a theme that it's in these components, but they're very tightly connected. So we found it difficult when a client wants to reuse one of our widgets or components in a different way. It's just proved challenging because of the initial design wasn't as maybe sort of separate as we would have liked, or as ideal. And our custom layout tool, as functional as that is, it's still it's custom, so we don't necessarily have extensibility and the flexibility of maybe more of a contributed solution or a core solution. So that has been at times proved challenging. And at the time we first built our distribution, we didn't have something like paragraphs, at least in the state that it is today. So we ended up writing a lot of custom fields, which also similar to the custom layout tool. It's just you get into some situations where you're not, it's not really possible to, or certain APIs and things like with views. So we run into some problems sometimes with custom fields, and it's also maintenance. It can be updating that can be difficult. Also, we are providing responsive images, which is something that we ended up doing a custom solution for in D7, but that wasn't as straightforward. It wasn't a contrib solution. Configuration just in D7 in general, it's a little rickety with features. Sometimes can not behave in these best practices we try to follow. Just not as always as clean as we'd like. And providing updates, is something that's we can handle, but we wanted a cleaner way to do it, so that site builders with their distribution can more easily manage the contributed modules they have. Because our distribution comes packaged with some contributed modules, you have to be careful not to add the module in on top of end up having two versions of a module. So a couple of pain points there. Yeah.
Okay. So one of the first things that I'm going to talk to you guys today is the UT road to Drupal 8. And to kick that off, I'm going to talk about maximizing brand guidelines, accessibility, and security. And in order to do that, I came up with this table in which we can see what we currently have in Drupal 7 and how we're thinking or how we're going to maximize the strategy in Drupal 8. And it's shown for brand guidelines, for accessibility, and for security. So as far as brand guidelines for Drupal 7, we currently have branding standards provided by the university, and these are not flexible. It doesn't mean that they are necessarily strict by any means, but it's just something that we had to integrate into our work, which, as Tyler mentioned earlier, it's kind of a nice thing. This is one of the reasons why you will like to have a distribution, because you can control this kind of things for your clients, so they don't have to worry about them. Then the team had no involvement in setting any of these standards, and this might sound like something that it's not really important, but if we consider what has been going on since we have been working on our Drupal 8 distribution, it was announced by the university that there's going to be a Texas design system, and the team members of our team, like Mike Marsello here, are going to be contributing to that design system. So that's nice, because now we are going to have opinions about what we would like to put in there, and what that we currently are working on that it's not necessarily already in there can be added, which is always nice to have that kind of flexibility, which comes to the second bullet point there. And then again, this is going to be created by university developers and designers. So people from different teams across the university are going to come up with some new guidelines that are going to be extending the current brand guidelines that we have. For accessibility, what we currently have in Drupal 7, we are following Section 508 compliance, and we use WorldSpace for scanning our sites. And for Drupal 8, we're going to try to integrate WCAG 2.0, and we're still going to be using WorldSpace, but there's going to be some new tools that, as far as I understand, that we're going to be using. And as part of that effort, we're going to try to get some automated checks for violations whenever we do code changes. We have been looking at different options, and we don't have a final answer to that one yet, but we are definitely looking into it just to have a better control. Yes?
Can you tell me what WorldSpace is?
WorldSpace, it's actually an a web application that it's used for scanning websites for accessibility checks, pretty much.
Okay.
So yeah, actually that's a good one. I forgot to put some notes about what exactly that is. But yeah, we have folks on our team that dedicate their time to accessibility checking, and they use this tool, which every time that we create a new site for a customer, we set it up in WorldSpace, so it has like some automated running options, and they can get like a score, and we have a specific score that we need to be able to have at least to feel comfortable with that site being up. Oh yeah, and for security, so for Drupal 7 we have we just have everybody sign up to the Drupal newsletter subscription, and we always get emails with any information about anything core-wise or contrib that needs to get some updates, and we just are in consistent communication within the team on chat applications like Slack, and we are always discussing if anything that came up on that newsletter is something that we should be considering for creating a new release for the distribution, which we're going to talk a little more about that process later. And for maximizing that on Drupal 8, this is something that we already have, but we didn't have when we started working on the presentation. Some automated Slack notifications. So we already have some integration. So whenever there's security updates for Drupal, actually I think it's not just security, but just updates in general. I'm not completely sure about that. We have a channel on Slack in which everybody will see that. So it kind of automates that process of everybody looking at their newsletter and making sure that we all know that there's some updates that might need to be added into our distribution. And we currently have 2 separate upstreams in Drupal 7, and we're going to try to avoid doing that on Drupal 8 and just unify both upstreams into the same distribution. That will definitely save us some work. Now, some extra stuff about branding. When we started working on the distribution a couple of years ago on Drupal 7, we didn't have some branding guidelines strictly specified at that point, and then when this became a concern, we needed to rework some stuff just to comply with those branding guidelines. And we can experiment as we work on Drupal 8 and request some feedback from the Texas Design System committee, which is the one that I was mentioning earlier. That was some of our team members are going to be part of that committee. And this screenshot, it's just an example of a snippet of the brand guideline. Of the brand bar. And I got that one out of the actual UT branding website. We have our own version for like our own Drupal version of this, but it's always nice because if anybody wants to build like a straightforward HTML website, they can always come and grab this snippet here. So there's definitely some useful stuff on that website that people can use. As far as accessibility, I haven't mentioned this before, but accessibility it's a must for us because the university as a public entity, it's required to provide some accessible sites for all audiences. And one personal note, it's that I must advise that there's times in which different testing tools might show up different results. Like sometimes if you just use a tool like on Google Chrome to test accessibility on a website, it doesn't necessarily reflect the same score on WorldSpace, which sometimes can be inconvenient, but it's not like it's like super far off the results, but there's times in which that can happen. And that screenshot, it's another screenshot of the same brand website from the university, in which we talk about how we follow Section 508 standards currently, and some other recommendations about how developers can use Wave or JAWS for accessibility. Some tips. As far as security, as I said before, the team always evaluates if any upcoming updates will affect the distributions somehow, and we always make a decision based on that discussion if we're gonna need to create a new release or not. And something that is somehow security related is we always try to avoid adding contrib modules into individual sites as much as possible. Since we deal with customers, there's times in which a customer needs some very specific thing, and as a personal example, we use Workbench moderation for many clients, but there's this one specific client that needs email integration with Workbench moderation, and there's a contrib module for that, in which if you set some configuration, you can send emails automatically whenever something is moved from draft to publish, or from to needs review, or from needs review to publish. And at first we added the module into their repository individually, but then we decided that we probably wanted to port that back into the distribution, because the problem here is that if you don't remember, or if you don't have any way to track which individual modules were installed in a particular client's site, then you might not even remember if at some point there's a security update for that specific module, and that can be a problem, because we should keep everything up to date. So this is kind of a practice that we try to avoid, and it's something that I wanted to advise everybody if you're also working with distributions. And it might be a bit obvious, but just in case. Another thing that I want to talk to you about is managing and packaging the distribution. And for this, we're going to talk a little bit about Composer. We use Pantheon, so we're going to be talking about Pantheon custom upstreams, and some information about how we the workflow in which that we use to package and release new versions of the distribution, or how we're going to try to do it from now on. So Composer, just wanted to specify that in case that anybody doesn't know yet what it is. It's just a tool for dependency management in PHP. And we're definitely gonna be using that from now on. We separate dependencies based on package types, and we came up with a custom package type specifically that we're gonna use for our custom modules. We're gonna create packages from our custom modules, and we're gonna specify a type for that work, and we are gonna make sure that every single package that has that type, it's assigning to a specific folder. Then we provide an example Composer file, and we set up a script that can install and update dependencies. And this is just a script that it's going to help out some developers that are not a lot into Composer. Like if they are just getting into it, it's definitely going to be useful, because we're just going to automate that process for them as long as they run that script every time that there's some updates, or whenever they just did a git clone of the repo. And patch management, Composer can be used for that, and that's something that it's not very. I don't think it's very popular yet, but it might become. And why is patch management so important? In my personal opinion, it's that, I probably shouldn't say that. I guess as a team member, anybody can step in if you don't agree. But sometimes people can consider that patching stuff might be bad, because it implies that you're going to be hacking core, either contrib code or just Drupal core. And it's not necessarily bad. It is bad if you don't know what exactly you're doing, but if you like structure the way you do it, then it can be very helpful. We definitely have been in situations in which we have needed to apply patches to some contrib modules just to be able to achieve some specific goals. There's an example on the left side, which I hope you guys can look at that, but it's that's a patch that we created for the node clone module. So as Tyler was showing you guys before, we have a layout editing tool in Drupal 7 that's a custom tool that we created, and I think we're gonna listen a little more about it later in the presentation. And the problem with the node clone module is that it doesn't support context, like it doesn't clone context of modules by default, and we really needed that in order to be able to clone nodes and keep the context, which is where everything is saved, like the placement of content in a specific regions for that node, and we really needed this in the as part of the cloning process. So we came up with this very small patch that is just adding an extra function that we are running, and on that function we do a lot of validation, but we just try to keep the patch very simple so it doesn't really affect the code from the contrib module on a high impact. And we always keep we have a specific directory for patches, and we have a README file inside, and in the README file we have like a description of what file it's being patched and why we patched it, and like kind of a description of what was the reason behind it. And now on Drupal 8 with Composer, one of the attributes that you set in your Composer data in your structure, it's actually patches, and you can specify in a specific package, which in this case it's Drupal core, and you can give just a patch description and a URL. It doesn't have to be like a HTTP URL. It can also be like a local file. If you just have a patch that you created yourself, you can give the relative path to your patch, and then you can apply it. This will be better for us because now, we're going to be working with Composer a lot, so now it's even easier to just go and take a look at the composer.json file and see what patches we have installed or we have applied in our code base so far. So that's nice. Now moving to Pantheon custom upstreams. So Pantheon, for anybody that doesn't know, it's a high-performance hosting platform used for Drupal and WordPress websites. And we currently have, as I mentioned before, 2 different upstreams for Drupal 7. So one, it's kind of like a software as a service, and a do-it-yourself one. And this is not going to be the case on Drupal 8. So we currently have those 2 as upstreams on Pantheon. Another nice thing about Pantheon is that it makes the work to apply upstream changes very easy, just because of the option of just get your changes into your distribution as easy as clicking a button on the dashboard, which is very nice, specifically for customers that are not very, very technical people. And the other thing, it's Terminus, which is the Pantheon's CLI. And in the screenshot that I added in here, it's just an example of the documentation from Pantheon about how to switch the repository URL using Terminus. Next, we have managing and releasing your distribution. So the way we do it, and this is like the 20,000 feet view of what we currently are going to try to do, or what we do, and how we are going to be doing it a little bit differently. So we have our workflow on Git, which it's basically like there's any changes that are needed to get updated. in the distribution. So with Git, we create a branch, we create a pull request with the changes that need to be added. We have reviewers as part of the team. We review code from other teammates. Whenever we know that there's something that we all decided that needs to get in there, we create a tag, and here it can split into two different options. We can either do the official release of it, but we don't necessarily want to do that because there's some customers that don't have any Git experience, and for those customers, what we do is we build a package, the release, and then we upload it into a UT services platform, in which it's pretty much like a compressed version of the distribution. And anybody that doesn't necessarily use like the command line or Git or whatever, they just can download that and apply the changes into their code. Into their sites manually. So that's basically what happens on the purple lining here. After we make the official release announcement, non-Git customers can just download that compressed file of the distribution, and it's we always provide instructions of the way in which people should apply their updates to their websites. So they just go ahead and follow those instructions. On the other side, when the official release happens, the Git customers are going to be able to just pull the latest upstream updates. And if there's composer changes, they're going to they want to make sure that they update their composer dependencies. And again, we're going to be providing a script for people to use that, so they don't have to struggle with it necessarily if they don't know how to deal with composer. And if there's no composer changes, they just have to again follow the instructions that we provide on the release notes, so people know what to do or how to apply their updates if there's any database updates or anything in particular that they need to be accounting for. And I'll pass it back to Tyler.
All right, so so getting into the layout tool choices that we're looking at for Drupal 8. So we were thinking about what were we going to do for Drupal 8? We knew we didn't necessarily want to go down the road of the custom layout tool. As like Polo slide with the patch, was just one illustration of how we ended up having to make patches on contribs to deal with our layout tool, making this context change and everything. So thinking about avoiding that, well, we looked at panels, of course, as a popular one. Seemed like a little too heavy duty for our users. Just a lot of options, a sort of big module with a lot of functionality. So we felt we might have to sort of start hacking that apart a little more than would probably be ideal. So we wound up building our own tool, which was called Layoutpreneur. And as you see the link, we actually wound up putting that on Drupal.org. And I think on the screen, this is what Layoutpreneur looked like. Once you enabled it on a content type, you could add regions. You use layout discovery. You can add the fields that were part of that node, and so we felt like this would be something that would match our use case, or fit our use case, I should say. Now, right around the time that we had gotten this on Drupal.org, sure enough, we realized that some other people had been working on some layout tools, the Drupal core team, and they, of course, Layout Builder, which we're all hearing about now, and it's becoming I think there's a lot of excitement around that, and and we've decided to get on that train, the Layout Builder train. So we, as a lesson in as hard as it can be to abandon your own project that we've been working on, I think it's for the sake of community and the sort of goals that we set out to not be on this island by ourselves with custom solutions. We essentially have abandoned. So if you go to Layoutpreneur now, you'll see we've stuck up the check out Layout Builder. We're not updating this anymore. It's probably a better solution, or better to go with Layout Builder. So going forward, that's going to be our tool of choice for layout. And this is just a shot of what Layout Builder looks like. It's funny, a lot of parallels to our Layoutpreneur tool. But of course, the ability to add sections is really what I think definitely pushes Layout Builder ahead. We were essentially not able to. We didn't have that ability in Layoutpreneur, and that's that's a great sort of getting that flexibility of just any sort of regions you want to place, and then put blocks in those, and it can be fields, blocks, anything you want. So, and we've also we decided to go with paragraphs for the widget. So at this point, paragraphs very mature. It's got a lot of popularity. So we didn't want to get into the sort of for custom compound fields with multiple fields inside of a field. We didn't want to get into field collection, or paragraph seems to handle that the most graceful. It's the most graceful way to handle that. If you have sort of one field with several things inside, which as the screenshot shows here, we have a widget called the featured highlights, which has a text field, headline, and the image media field, the date, the copy, so all of that. Can be done nicely through paragraphs. And I think now I was going to show you guys briefly. So we are still developing our Drupal 8 distribution. We're sort of at the point of theming it at this point, or sort of getting the theme on all the widgets and everything like that mapped over. And we're going to provide a migration path. So there's definitely some work we're still having to do. But here's the distro just off a fresh install, and you can see our theme is still a little rough around the edges. Let me go into, so here we are providing a content type called the flex page. In our Drupal 7 distribution, we had a couple of content types. We had a landing page content type, and we had a standard page, and each of those had specific layouts that you were kind of locked into, and you, picking one or the other, and you sort of had to know, okay, on a landing page I have these regions, and on a standard page I have these other. So all of that complexity is something we're eliminating here. So you can see we've customized the node edit screen a bit. These are our paragraph reference fields, and you can. And so this handles as these forms get longer and longer. You can collapse them, so that'll be an improvement there over the traditional out of the box UI. And then I think we have the layout builder enabled. You can add a section here. And we can, add our blocks from our, or add our fields, I should say, from our nodes here. I know one thing that we're working to help contribute to is to have this list of available, items that you can place. We're working to help curate that, to provide a hook to, so your customer, your client wouldn't have to get every single, thing on the site. It would just be, I think I hit featured highlight. Oops, I think I had added a flex content area there. But yeah, you can see just a sort of a sample of how this is, working pretty nicely at this point, just sort of out of the box, core, without us really having to do any sort of customization there. So this is definitely nice, something we're excited about. Yeah. Yeah, and so transitioning from that to the sort of theming layer, I'm going to pass it off to Mike because we're more of a front-end specialist.
All right, so I was going to talk about our theme. And I wanted to talk about three kind of questions we had, some decisions we had to make when we're making this jump from Drupal 7 to Drupal 8. Number one is, and Tyler touched on this before, was that coupling we had between our widgets and layout tool and a theme. That was problematic for people that wanted to use the widgets with their own theme, or people that wanted to use our theme on its own with a site not using the widget and layout tool. So we wanted to break that coupling so that you can easily do that. Number two is we were looking into using a pattern lab type approach, and Emulsify from Floor Kitchens is the one that we really looked into. We eventually opted not to do that, and I'll go into the reasons why in just a minute. And then the third one is switching from Zerb Foundation to Bootstrap for our front-end framework that our theme will be taking advantage of, and I'll go into those reasons in just a minute. Okay, so in terms of separating the layout tool and the widgets from the theme, there are some implications for doing that. Number one is your templates and pre-process logic. Where should that stuff live? Now, all the widgets that we have, they're going to be custom modules. So what we're going to do is we'll have generic templates that are very close to kind of the stock paragraph twig file or the field twig file. those will live in the modules along with very minimal preprocessed logic just to do the bare bones of what needs to be done. If there's a linked image, for example, that's not straightforward to do just through the UI, so there'll be some preprocessed logic to build that in the module. Now, meanwhile, in the theme, we can have our much more specific templates that will take advantage of Bootstrap classes and whatever other kind of specific things we need. So number 2, like I said, we're going to be using the Bootstrap library, and our theme is going to be dependent on that library, but we don't want the widgets and layout tool to be dependent on that. So the templates and the logic that are in the modules won't have any references to Bootstrap. All of that will be just in the theme. And number 3 is with responsive image styles. In Drupal 7, this was a much more difficult thing to accomplish. We had a few kind of high-impact fields with full-width images that we had a custom solution for, but we did not want to do that, obviously, unnecessarily. And then Drupal 8 came along and does this out of the box. So we have these responsive image styles that will be separate from the theme, so that you can still leverage them while using a different theme. Okay, as to using Pattern Lab, and like I said, Emulsify is the solution that we really looked into. And Emulsify is a great tool. It gives you a Pattern Lab in your theme, then you have Drupal templates, which the variables in your Drupal templates are mapped to the variables in your Pattern Lab. So we were really excited about this. We thought it was going to work, and then we really thought about it, how this would work for our customers, and there were some issues that came up. So some of the requirements for our theme are that it's going to be used as a parent theme, and then developers, or campus developers, will be building sub-themes off of it. So that's one thing. And then another requirement is that we're going to be pushing out frequent updates. These could be simple bug fixes, it could be totally new functionality, but templates that are in the Pattern Lab could very easily change with time. So that has some ramifications for sub-themers. And there would be kind of 2 scenarios that would result in. The first one is that we would just leave the Pattern Lab in the parent theme, and then a sub-theme wouldn't contain the Pattern Lab. Now the problem with that is then the living style guide, which is one of the big benefits of Pattern Lab, would only reflect the parent theme. It wouldn't have the customizations that the sub-themer creates. So that didn't really work. And then another option was for people to clone the Pattern Lab into their sub-theme. And then the problem with that is what happens with updates if we update something. Then whatever updates there are, they would have to manually work that into anything that they may have changed in their sub-theme. So that also didn't seem like a great solution. So because of those things, we decided not to use Emulsify or any other kind of Pattern Lab implementation. What we will be doing is trying to componentize our widgets, keep things separate, and use the BEM methodology for class naming. Block element modifier. It's a way to kind of standardize your class names and make them more understandable. And we'll also be using the Texas design system, which I'll go into next. So here are some examples of other design systems that are out there. Shopify has Polaris, so developers that are building on top of the Shopify platform can use this as a system to guide their development. Carbon is built by IBM for the same purpose. And then Rivet is from Indiana University, and that's one that's probably closest to what we're trying to accomplish at UT. And here's just a sample page from the Rivet website. And if you've looked at the Bootstrap kitchen sink page or the Foundation page, this is very similar. It has all these things that are, all these elements that have Indiana University's branding. They meet their accessibility guidelines. It's very comprehensive. So, in case you're wondering what the difference is between a design system and a pattern library. Basically, a pattern library is a piece of a design system. So the pattern library or pattern lab will kind of give you the what, and then the design system will help you with, you know, the where, the when, like what situation would I use this in, like where do I use this, why do I use this. So it's a lot more full featured. One of the downsides of using the design system versus using pattern lab is we won't get that living style guide, but life is about compromise. Okay, our next big decision was our front-end framework that we're going to build the theme around. So for Drupal 7, we were using Foundation 5, which met our needs, but we had some, when we were making the decision, moving from Drupal 7 to Drupal 8, that seemed like the time to reconsider some of these things, see if there might be better options. And when we were making this decision, Foundation 6 had just been released, and Bootstrap 4 was still in beta. It's stable now, but at the time it was just in beta. And we ended up deciding to use Bootstrap for the following reasons. There's just more adoption across the board. I want to say it's like 40% or 50% for Bootstrap versus 5% for Foundation in terms of front-end frameworks. So there's better adoption. Presumably there's going to be more familiarity among developers using it. And there's definitely a lot more online resources, tutorials, code snippets, things like that. We also made this decision on the assumption that there's going to be a more robust ecosystem of contrib modules. This was definitely the case with Drupal 7, and it is the case in Drupal 8, and we're assuming that that's just going to become greater and greater. So our next decision was, do we just extend off of the Drupal Bootstrap theme? Now, at the time we made this, there wasn't even a roadmap for version 4 with the Drupal theme. There since is a dev branch, and they're actively working on it now. But that was a downside at the time. And we also wanted more control over which parts of the library get loaded. We don't want to necessarily load the entire thing. So we want to kind of manage file sizes. So we opted to do our own custom theme, which has the Bootstrap library in it. There are some implications from doing this. Now, this would still be the case regardless. If we had just moved from Foundation 5 to Foundation 6, there would obviously be these implications would still be the case there too, but it would be a little bit more pronounced moving from Foundation to Bootstrap. So if you have custom code in your WYSIWYGs that leverages, Foundation, if you have a Foundation accordion in a WYSIWYG, obviously it's not going to work when that HTML gets migrated into Drupal 8, so that will need to be reworked. Also, anything in your subtheme that leverages Foundation classes or markup will need to be reconfigured for Bootstrap. Here's just a list of some existing Drupal 8 Bootstrap-related projects. So you have Bootstrap Layouts, which gives you a whole ton of layouts that Layout Builder can leverage. So that's a great module. Bootstrap Paragraphs gives you a whole slew of paragraph types that use the Bootstrap library. Views Bootstrap is really cool. You can output your views right into could be accordions or carousels or whatever Bootstrap elements you have selected. And then there are also some CK Editor integration modules that make it easy to use Bootstrap buttons or the glyphicons or grid or tabs right in your WYSIWYG. Now, not all of these are ready for version 4. Some of these are still on Bootstrap version 3. But with time, I would assume they'll all be version 4 compatible. And this list will probably only get bigger with time. That's it for me. I'll pass it back to Tyler.
All right, so just to wrap up here, we've got, so what we've done, I think, in our design, or what we feel is the benefits of our design, one of our big problems was we have this wide range of users. So some people do know Composer, some people do not. Some people use Git, others don't even want to touch it, don't even want to know. And so for that reason, with our architecture, you totally have that freedom. We provide the packaged, the package profile so that you can just upload in FileZilla to your server. You don't even have to run Composer install or any of that stuff. And so that's the reason for our flow diagram earlier. And also similarly, our custom paragraph types. They're all independently, they're in their own modules as the config. So the templates can be overridden in the theme. And so you're free to make your own content type, stick whatever paragraph types from our collection that you want, tweak those as needed. We allow for that. And similarly, Corn Contrib is used as much as possible. So we avoid a lot of the pitfalls of custom implementations of things with this approach. And just to mention, I think we felt these are things worth mentioning. Drupal 8, very cool, niceties that Drupal 8 comes with, but we have opted out of for our distribution. Quick edit, not quite where we need it to be for Layout Builder and the other ecosystem we have right now of modules. The multilingual stuff, while very, very awesome, very cool, we're not currently implementing that, at least in the distribution. Individual users can for sure implement as much of these things as they want, but for the sake of generalizing it to the audience, the idea is we want to build it for a varied audience and may use it in different ways. So same thing with the web services stuff. There's really no standardized API web service configuration that we provide in our distribution, and same thing with config management. So we are putting config into modules, but we're not pre-configuring your Drupal 8 site and setting your config folder. We've just packaged everything up, actually using features to package config and to put into modules so that individual sites can then tweak the config and export it for their individual site, and we won't clash with that as we provide them updates in the future upstream updates they receive. Any questions?
I'm kind of in an interesting position because I'm with UT and we have an external developer who has worked with our department and built a site, and we're at a point where the staff that we have don't have Drupal experience, and we don't necessarily, we're kind of trying to figure out, do we go with Drupal moving forward for a different site that we're building? We want to try and unify everything as much as possible. So I don't know how much I should hijack this conversation in terms of trying to figure out the distribution that you guys are talking about would be only through Pantheon, or would be would also run on UT Web if that's what.
Yeah, absolutely.
Decided.
Yeah.
And then, so one of the things that I kind of envision with stuff like distributions would be having something that UT has set up, a distribution that is kind of a UT core that then an external developer would have as a base and then could develop additional features for us, or is that just the antithesis of what you guys are trying to set up?
You guys mind if I answer?
Yeah, please.
So that was definitely one of the sort of intended use cases for our Drupal 7 distribution. And it has been done, and I can talk later and give you examples of where it's been done. The trouble we ran into with Drupal 7 distribution is that so much of it was custom and kind of didn't work within the framework that a developer working for an agency would expect, that they ended up spending a lot of time sort of working against the things that we had built instead of working with them. Likewise, designers who were trying to design a site within a design framework that they didn't understand had trouble understanding what would be an expensive design customization versus what would be a relatively cheap design customization. So over the past 2 years, I've sort of come to the conclusion that if people are in that position, they should think very hard about whether they're actually going to get enough benefit out of using the distribution versus just starting from scratch. With that being said, they talked a lot about our efforts in Drupal 8 to have a better separation of concerns between the theme and the tools and the content widgets. And my hope is that we'll be able to say a little more easily, like, yeah, just take the theme if that's what you want to start with, and don't worry about the other stuff. Like, if you're familiar with panels and you really want to use panels, take our theme and use panels with the theme, and don't try to use our content widgets and our page layout system. But we are also trying to use as much core and really common contrib in Drupal 8 as we can too. So trying to mitigate those things, but there still may be a point at which getting an external developer, especially if it's the first time they've used this distribution, to try to work with it might not be the best investment of everyone's time and money.
I think that's definitely like kind of what's the best use of everyone's time, and what's the best way to kind of start with to have a solid starting point to then build.
I think the same thing would probably be true if we were talking about any other Drupal distribution like Atrium or Commerce Kickstarter or something like that. Like if you took somebody who'd never used OpenAtrium before and you said, I want you to use OpenAtrium, but I want you to do these 10 customizations on top of it, they might find themselves in this really weird position of Atrium has expectations about the way things are done that don't really match the way they're used to working, and then you get, conflict and wasted time.
Yeah, as an agency, as a comment to that, we have our own distribution that we use internally for clients. So there's a lot of the same decisions you guys have made that we made, and along the paragraphs line and not using panels and things like that. So it would be, at least for us, it would be pretty simple to take some of what you have in your distribution and incorporate it into ours, or start with yours and incorporate some of our things into it. So I think the decisions you made are kind of generalized enough that that's flexible and easy to do in Drupal 8 anyway.
Yeah, that's good to hear.
But whether we start with yours or not, or start with ours, I don't know. I mean, you have to look at the individual project, but either one would get you, some movement down the road without having to start from scratch. So. And then my only question I had was, when you were showing the content type that was like the flexible page content type,
Right.
I noticed you had a bunch of, there were a ton of fields there.
Yeah.
And they all had like paragraphs inside of them, I assume,
Yeah.
for the most part. Could you talk a little bit about the decision as to why to have so many fields as opposed to just one field with a wide variety of paragraph types that can be added to one single field, which gives you that kind of flexibility to rearrange things on the order of those elements because it's only one field? Or was that part of, is that part of your decision there?
I think part of that decision was in our Drupal 7 distribution. We have sort of very similar to this, and I think we wanted to ease the transition for, we had that sort of keep in mind. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it could have been done, I think, that way. Yeah, Mark. Yeah.
I think the one thing that you're describing right now is you're still saying that there would be different fields. It would just be paragraph options within one field.
Right.
And so that, in that sense, it would be a consistent experience for the person coming from Drupal 7. I think the key difference is that if it's on a single field, at least as of today, compared to how Drupal core is going to be implementing Layout Builder, you would not be able to rearrange those fields via Layout Builder individually because they'd be field deltas as opposed to individual fields. And so you could stack them vertically through paragraphs, but you wouldn't be able to just place them in any place in the Layout Builder regions.
Yeah.
The paragraphs paradigm today seems very oriented towards the layer cake approach.
Yeah.
Page building, and our Drupal 7 distribution is much more of a variety of region options, and then you being able to place each field in each region independently, and so we wanted to preserve that.
Yeah. Again, I don't want to hijack this whole thing, but part of the decision where in ours, what we did is we have generally one field and we have all those paragraph types, and then we'll use nested paragraphs for some of the like layouts that are multiple things on a row, for lack of a better term. And it gave us that flexibility, but we didn't have Layout Builder when we built it because we've been building Drupal 8 sites for 2 years now, so almost. So that was all just like we're doing all of that layout stuff in CSS after the fact, and not just we're worried about what the order of things are. But that does make sense. That hopefully Layout Builder will eventually have the ability to add those deltas into different regions. Yeah, maybe we'll work on that.
Our use case is very focused on putting the ability to micromanage the layout in the hands of the content.
Yeah.
But I think ideally too, the flexibility here, it's like you could maybe even implement some of these widgets as block types or plugin blocks, right? And then just just not even use a field, right? And so we're open for that at this point. We're sort of ready for varying implementations, and hopefully, right, I think, optimistically, we haven't locked ourselves in, too much to a concrete design for building the pages and such. Yeah.
I think also, you guys correct me if I'm not misspeaking, but given the way we built the paragraph types, if someone didn't want to use this flex page content type implementation, they could do the implementation you're talking about using our paragraph types, and it would all tie together very smoothly, which was not as much the case with our Drupal 7.
Yeah. Just a different content type?
Yeah, just create your own content type, add the one field, and then make all those paragraph types available as,
Yeah. A lot of that too is the balance between like true data modeling in Drupal versus layout.
Yes, absolutely.
Like which one is your priority?
This is a hybrid of blobs and chunks.
Right.
Blunks or schlobs.
Yeah. Because I imagine with that approach, you get to a point where there's so many things, it might get a little unwieldy. If I want to move thing down here, way up there, right, I got to drag it up, and the trade-offs are definitely there. But thinking of like if you were to come on and say, hey, no, I want to do it with the single field approach. Yeah, it should be.
And there's some limitations that I found if you have like a simple paragraph inside of a column wrapper and you need to move it outside that column wrapper, that's
Sure.
not easily done. But with a layout builder, it's completely independent of, like, it was in a column over here and I just want to move it full width up here. That's easy for a novice content editor to do.
Absolutely.
They're going to be able to do all sorts of horrible things.
Build amazing tools and they will mess everything
Put
up.
a slideshow in the right sidebar.
Challenge accepted. They had all these fields. We had to use each one of all of them.
That's it.
Happens to remember a cookie when you put 100 cookies on the page.
Well, thank you all.
Thank you.